Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to pull up a memory from the bottom of history's damp drawer, the kind that's still a little moldy, a little sad, and just absurd enough to help you drift off with a frown that might, eventually, become a smile. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And while you're at it, drop your local time and where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know where this strange little journey is reaching you. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get down to business tonight. You've been dragging your feet along the slippery stone path just outside a crooked inn, the kind where the roof leaks and the ale tastes like regret. The clouds above you hang low and grey, like they're waiting for something worse than rain. You pull your cloak tighter and look toward the sound of horses clattering across wet cobblestones. No one here is smiling. The air has that particular tension, like the scent of rust and parchment. Something is about to snap. You don't need a prophet to tell you that across France, across England, something ancient is stringing the royal bloodlines. This isn't just another border squabble or an insult tossed between cousins over bad wine. This is about the throne of France, and it's about to rain arrows for over 100 years. See, your boots are planted in the year 1328. King Charles IV of France has died, and for once, the French nobles aren't arguing about taxes or wine regions, they're arguing about who should wear the crown. Charles had no surviving sons, which, in medieval royal logic, was basically the equivalent of misplacing the kingdom. In the dusty corridors of Paris and London, claims are being drawn like daggers, and across the Channel, England's King Edward III is sharpening his own argument. His mother, Isabella of France, was the sister of the late king. That should count, right? Royal blood is royal blood unless, of course, you happen to be a French noble who really doesn't want a young English upstart on your throne. So, the French decide to invoke Salic law, the handy little clause that says no girls allowed when it comes to inheriting the crown. A law, by the way, that hadn't mattered all that much until now. Historians still debate whether this was legal brilliance or political cowardice. But either way, Edward is out instead. The French place the crown on the head of Philip VI, the cousin of Charles IV, and a man who, at best, could be described as distantly appropriate. He's crowned in Reims, and the nobles breathe a sigh of relief. France stays French, for now. But you're still standing in that rain. You've overheard whispers in taverns and market stalls. Merchants fret. Archers test their strings in the dark. There's a storm coming not from the sky, but from across the sea, and it's wrapped in the green and gold of English ambition. You trot inside the inn, shaking off droplets like a half-drowned dog. The fire crackles in the hearth, and someone's already carved a crown into the wood above it, an English one. You glance at it, and someone mutters behind you, "It won't last." Outside, carts rattle with sharpened stakes and barrels of salted meat. You see young boys polishing helmets too big for their heads, eager for a war they don't understand. An old man grumbles something about Normandy and spits into the coals. He's been here before, in a different war with a different king. He always says the same thing. Every French field grows swords, not wheat, as thunder groans overhead. You climb the stairs to your room. The bed smells faintly of damp wool and dust. But it'll do. You lie back, listening to the tavern voices swell and fade, and for a moment, you wonder what might have happened if Edward had simply let it go, if he'd stayed content with England and left France to its cousins. But that's not what happened, and you're about to dream your way into one of the longest, most tragic, and most pointlessly glorious conflicts in human history. A war of crowns, of broken treaties, of longbowmen and saints. Madness and mud. A war that will last through generations, changing weapons, languages, and even the definition of kinship itself, for now, though. You close your eyes and hear it begin not with a trumpet, but with the quiet flick of a pen signing a crown away. The fire downstairs sputters, the rain doesn't stop. You wake to the sound of arguments downstairs, the kind that start with grumbles and end with chairs moving too fast. It's still raining because of course it is, and when you peek through the warped glass, you see two merchants loading sacks into a wagon. Looking nervously at the road, one mutters something about tariffs, the other spits and says, "No, it's war. You know better now. This isn't just about bloodlines or royal insults. This is about money and ports and wool. Especially English wool golden, thick and profitable beyond measure. France has been flexing its power over English merchants through Flanders, cutting off trade routes like a butcher with a shaky hand. That's not just inconvenient. That's an act of war with a price tag. King Edward III is tired of it. So he does what any young monarch with too much pride and not enough patience does. He doubles down. In 1337, standing in Westminster like he owns not just a throne, but destiny itself, Edward proclaims himself the rightful king of France. You're not sure whether to laugh or applaud. Historians still debate whether this was a serious bid for the crown or a dramatic chess move in a trade war. But one thing's certain, the pieces are on the board now, and you, lucky traveler that you are about to march. The call to arms doesn't sound like a bugle. It sounds like tax collectors banging on doors and scribes drafting endless letters of conscription. It sounds like blacksmiths beating armor into shapes they barely remember from their father's time. You are not a knight. You are not a lord. But you're swept up all the same. One day you're mending boots and haggling over leaks, and the next you're in Dover, watching ships bob like corks, loaded with swords, bowmen, and nervous horses. England is crossing the channel not for a visit, but for a reckoning. When you arrive, France is not what you expected. The fields are green, the skies are still grey, and the people are already tired of everyone in armor. You see peasants hiding grain in false bottom barrels, mothers teaching children not to speak when soldiers pass. You pretend not to notice when old men bury wine in the orchard. War hasn't even touched this place yet, but it's already taken something. Edward lands with thunder. He doesn't march like a conqueror, he parades. His banners flap in the wind like smug decorations, and his knights look like walking stained glass windows. The French lords blink slowly. They weren't ready for a show. They were ready for a politics. Philip VI, the French king, responds the only way pride allows, with full cavalry. And you're trotting somewhere near Caen, wondering why every noble thinks battlefields are just wet stages. By 1340, Edward and Philip clash at the naval battle of Sluys, and for once, the English dominate on water. Imagine hundreds of ships lashed together like drunken dancers, crashing and creaking under fire. Arrows rain like angry bees. You're ordered to haul bodies off a deck slick with blood and brine. The English win. But the war isn't over. That was just the overture. What follows is a lull and awkward medieval staring contest. Both sides expect the other to blink. But Edward has something else planned. He doesn't just want the throne. He wants France's allies to crumble too. He starts courting Flanders, an industrial powerhouse if ever there was one. You sit in the back of a candlelit hall while Edward offers titles, trade, and vague promises to cities like Ghent and Bruges. They listen. They always listen when gold is louder than ancestry. Soon, towns once loyal to France are tilting eastward, toward England. And you're still just trying to keep your boots dried out back in England. People are starting to worry. The war is costing coin and patience. Nobles squabble. Parliament grumbles. But Edward, ever the showman, knows how to rally spirits. He throws feasts, declares victories. and parades foreign dignitaries like trophies. You remember one such feast vividly. It's held in a tent the size of a cathedral, with wine flowing like regret. A bard sings of valor, while Edward explains to a Dutch envoy why his claim is divinely ordained. You sip bitter ale, wondering if even he believes that anymore. Outside, rumors swirl. Philip is massing troops in the north. You're sent on reconnaissance. Though that's a generous term for wandering round hoping not to get stabbed. You see forests bristling with spears. You hear French accents round campfires, arguing about who should lead. Even now, unity is paper thin. But here's the twist: Edward has no intention of meeting them yet. He's buying time, raising funds, sending letters, marrying off daughters like strategic bishops on a royal chessboard. Every move is deliberate, but also dangerous. And then just when you think this might all fizzle into treaties and sulkingly invades Normandy. It's a scorched earth campaign. The kind that leaves ashes in your nostrils and guilt in your throat. You watch men torch grain stores, slaughter livestock, and leave villagers with nothing but soot. You ride past a church with smoke curling from the bell tower. The child stares from the rubble. No one speaks stop this. You realize, is not a war of kings. It's a war of attrition, a slow, grinding ruin. Edward presses inland, toward Crecy. The French scramble to meet him, dragging nobles from their estates like they're waking them from a long nap. Philip thinks he has the numbers tens of thousands of cavalry. Glittering with arrogance, you, however, have a longbow and a sinking feeling, and somewhere in your gut, you know, the next chapter is going to be loud. By the time you make it to Crecy, you're filthy, exhausted, and somehow still more afraid of getting stepped on by a French horse than skewered by a French lance. You are not alone in that. The English arm is smaller, outnumbered. Sunburned from days of marching through summer fields, is looking less like an invasion force and more like a really determined medieval camping trip. But you have longbows. And longbows are not polite. It's August 1346. The fields round Crecy and Ponthieu undulate like sleepy hills, thick with tall wheat and the humid stink of late summer. You're camped beneath a tree, chewing something that might once have been meat. When word spreads like spilled wine, the French are coming, and they are many. Philip VI has rallied somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 troops. His knights shine like nightmares, his crossbowmen Geno's mercenaries. No less march with grim discipline. You squint across the field and wonder if anyone in that mass has ever had to wash their own socks. Edward, he's calm, to calm. He chooses his ground with a hunter's eye, posting his forces on a gently sloping hill, flanked by ditches and woods. He raise you and the rest of the longbowmen like storm clouds at the edge of a chessboard. If the French charge, they'll be running uphill into mud, into arrows and into bad decisions. And then the blind king shows up. Yes, blind. John of Bohemia, an old warrior past his glory days, insists on joining the battle. He can't see, but honor, pride, and an extremely medieval definition of retirement drive him forward. To squires tie their horses to his and ride into the fray together. You watch from the hilltop, stunned, as 3 horses vanish into the melee like a dying constellation. Later, when you find them, all 3 are dead. John's crest lies in the mud, a broken reminder that chivalry doesn't care about common sense. Historians still debate whether this was tragic valor or theatrical suicide, but everyone remembers it. The battle begins in chaos. The Geno's crossbowmen march forward, bows drawn. But they're tired, poorly coordinated, and worst of all, their bowstrings are wet. Rain had caught them earlier, and crossbows are not waterproof friends. The English, with their waxed longbow strings and a knowing calm, begin unleashing death at 10 arrows per minute. The Genos fall apart. They stumble, retreat, and scream for help. Philip watches, fuming, and orders his cavalry to ride straight through them. Yes, Through them, if you're imagining French knights mowing down their own allies to reach the enemy faster, congratulations, you're officially traumatized. And still the arrows fall. You lose one every few seconds, fingers blistered, shoulders aching. You aim not for men, but for horses. Because knights are easier to kill when they're on the ground screaming under 90 pounds of armor. Round you, bowmen shout commands, pass spare arrows, and laugh like lunatics. One even sings. You're too tired to ask if he's serious. The battlefield turns into a mess of bodies, churned earth, and pride. French charges come in waves and break on your hill like surf on rocks. The sun dips low, the cries grow fewer, and you still standing, still alive, realize something awful. You've won at the cost. Thousands of French dead, nobles, dukes, even kings' sons lie broken in the muck. The English lose perhaps a few hundred. You try not to remember their names. It makes sleeping harder later, as dust creeps in and birds begin to return to trees that saw too much. Edward orders no pursuit. Let them crawl away. He says, you stare at the horizon, where smoke rises from abandoned tents. And then, because one horror isn't enough, news reaches you that Calais will be next. The town, perched on the channel like a stubborn stone in France's boot, is under siege. Edward wants it. Badly. So badly that you spend the next 11 months throwing rocks at its walls and boiling your boots for broth. You hear stories. Inside Calais, citizens eat rats and pray for miracles outside. English soldiers build huts, farms, even market stalls. A town has risen round a siege, and still, no one blinks. When Calais finally falls in 1347, Edward makes a show of it. He demands the city's leaders walk out barefoot, wearing nothing but shirts and nooses round their necks, offering the keys to the city. It's performative cruelty, and you watch it with a grimace. Historians still debate whether it was diplomacy, intimidation, or just plain narcissism. But it works. Calais becomes English, and stays English for centuries. You return to England, briefly, carrying coins, stories, and more nightmares than you'll admit. You think the war might pause, that this whole mess, kings and cousins, arrows and sieges, might slow down. But you'd be wrong, because waiting in the shadows, behind every court intrigue and battlefield feast, is a far worse guest than war. Plague. And you're about to meet it. You smell it before you see it, rotting sweetly beneath the floorboards, clinging to the sweat of the sick, trailing behind carts that creak slowly through the village at dawn. It isn't war, not in the usual sense, but it's killing faster, more brutally, more indiscriminately. It's 1348, and the Black Death has arrived. You thought you were done. You thought the horrors of Crécy and Calais had brought some kind of pause. But this isn't a truce. This is annihilation without arrows. You've returned to England for a rest, to sell your looted wine and maybe start a bakery. And for a brief while, life pretends to resume. Markets hum, the church bells ring, and mothers scold their children for running in the mud. But somewhere near the coast, a merchant ship docks with a stench on its hull and death in its rats. By the time anyone notices, it's too late. One man coughs, then 5. Then the graveyards overflow. You see it in the eyes of the priests. Not fear, resignation. This isn't a divine punishment. They say it's something else, something darker, something even they can't name. In London, carts of bodies roll through the streets like grim parades. You cover your mouth with rags soaked in vinegar because someone said that helps, and pretend it doesn't smell like failure. No more sermons. No more taxes. Just coughing and silence. The war pauses not because kings choose peace, but because entire towns die too quickly to fight. Even Edward retreats, not with diplomacy, but because half his commanders are dead. The French stop attacking not because they're defeated, but because they're too busy burning corpses in mass graves. Historians still debate whether the war truly paused or just held its breath. But you know the truth. Even death has to wait its turn sometimes. Somehow, you survive. You hide in a barn for 6 weeks with moldy bread and a broken lute for a company. You talk to mice like old friends. You learn to appreciate the silence. The peace that only comes when the entire world is too sick to scream. When you finally emerge, the world looks smaller. Fields lie abandoned. Roads are quiet. Even the bandits have stopped bothering. You pass through towns where no one waves. No one calls out. Just empty shutters and forgotten prayers. You meet a widow outside Canterbury. She asks if you're French. You say no. She gives you bread anyway. Eventually, the fog of death lifts. Not completely, never completely, but enough that kings remember their grievances. In 1355, war breeds again, and Edward has no star. His son, Edward of Woodstock, called the Black Prince. You meet him once, briefly. He's younger than you, but his armor gleams like warning. His eyes are too sharp for someone who's never picked lice from a dying man's hair. He leads a chevauchée, a lovely French word that means let's burn everything we see. It's not war. It's economic collapse with a drumbeat. You follow him through southern France. Fields burn. Villages vanish. You ride past vineyards once filled with laughter, now charred and broken. But the Black Prince wins, over and over. He's swift, brutal, and strangely poetic. A Night Out of a Storybook. The storybook was written in smoke and screams. In 1356, you march to Poitiers. France is trying to get its act together. King John II, finally taking matters into his own hands, leads a massive force against the English. He's noble, proud, and completely unaware of what's about to happen. You're posted on the flank, arrow ready, heart steady. The battle begins in confusion. As always, French cavalry charges, confident as ever, only to hit English spikes and get buried under longbow volleys. It's Crecy all over again. But now the English are even more ruthless. You see knights fall like dominoes, squires scream. And amid the chaos, something surreal happens. The French king is captured. Yes, captured. By a group of men-at-arms with no titles, no lands, just luck, timing, and good boots. You help bind the king. He doesn't resist. He asks for wine. Later, you sit in a tent, watching him play chess with his jailer. He looks relieved. No responsibilities, no war councils, just a game he might finally win. Back in England, John is paraded through the streets like a prize turkey. People cheer. Throw flowers. You stay quiet. You've seen what it took to get him here. Edward the Black Prince becomes a legend. Poets sing his name. French nobles panic. The Treaty of Brittany is signed in 1360, granting huge swaths of French land to England and releasing King John after a ransom the size of a national budget. Peace, they call it. But it's not. You settle for a while. Build a small home near Dover. Plant beans. Try to forget the sound of arrows. But in your sleep, you still see fields burning. Still hear coughing in the wind. The war hasn't ended. It's just changing shape. And you're still not done. You wake one morning to find your bean plants crushed under a horse's hoofprint. Not a random accident, no. A message. The war is back. And it doesn't knock politely. It kicks in your door, eats your breakfast, and drags your son off to be a squire before he can grow a proper mustache. It's 1364. And whatever peace Brittany offered is unraveling faster than the hem of your old tunic. The French are rearming, reuniting, and shockingly learning from their past. England, still drunk on victory, still thinking longbows are the answer to every question, including ones about taxes and weather. You sell your patch of land and head to London. Safer there, maybe, or at least better wine. The cities change bigger, bolder. buzzing with the uneasy energy of a nation that thinks it won but secretly feels the ground shifting. The king's still Edward III, but age has dulled him. He's more interested in court fashion than campaigns. And the Black Prince, he's ill. Some say dysentery, others whisper curses. He coughs bloody in private while the bards still sing his name in public. You see him once in Westminster pale, gaunt, and furious with his own body. France, meanwhile, has a new King Charles V. They call him the Wise, which in medieval politics basically means he hasn't accidentally impaled himself yet. But he's clever, quiet, dangerous in the way accountants are dangerous, precise, patient, deadly over time. You end up in Brittany, working with a mercenary band that doesn't ask too many questions, the kind that drinks with you on Sunday and loots with you on Monday. One guy jock claims to have punched a duke. You don't ask which one. In 1369, France breaks the treaty. Surprised. Neither were you. They reclaim lands ceded under Brittany, one by one, like ticking off a checklist. Normandy, Anjou, Maine. You're stationed in a town near Limoges when the French ride past. You don't even draw your sword. What's the point? The garrison surrenders before lunch. The Black Prince hears about it. He's livid. Despite his illness, he leads a punitive expedition back to Limoges, determined to prove he's not dead yet. And what follows is not noble, not glorious. It's a massacre. The city is taken, its people butchered, men, women, children. You help sort the bodies afterward. Their faces blur. The smell doesn't. Historians still debate whether it was a calculated show of force or just vengeance unleashed, but you know it wasn't necessary. The Black Prince returns to England, broken. He dies in 1376, a year before his father. You attend the funeral. The crown passes to a 10-year-old boy, Richard II. You remember him as a sullen child who didn't like mud on his shoes. France isn't exactly stable either. Charles V dies in 1380, leaving his 12-year-old son, Charles VI, to inherit a war and a treasury held together with wax and whispered prayers. You travel as a scribe now, less killing, more ink. You copy edicts, treaties, even church sermons, anything to stay warm and fed. But one day, in the court of a noble, you hear something that chills you more than a winter wind. Charles VI thinks he's made of glass. Yes, glass. He refuses to be touched. Terrified he'll shatter. Sometimes he forgets who he is. One day he kills his own knight in a fevered delusion. The court tiptoes round him, and you quietly pack your things and leave. Historians still argue whether it was schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or the weight of royal expectation. But either way, France has a king who thinks chairs might betray him. England, not faring better. Richard II grows into a vain, paranoid ruler who surrounds himself with flatterers and forgets how to listen. In 1381, the peasants revolt, angry about taxes, land, and the fact that they still can't afford meat. You dodge pitchforks in the street and briefly pretend to be a priest just to get through a checkpoint. The rebellion is crushed, of course, but the message rings clear. The war isn't just between crowns. It's between everyone and everything. You get older, slower, wiser, maybe. One night, in a tavern near Dover, a man asks what the 100 Years' War is really about. You pause, think, swirl your wine, and then you say, "Two kings walked into a history book and forgot how to leave." The man laughs. You don't single quotes, your joints crack louder than your boots now. You've spent decades in the orbit of kings and killers, and yet here you are in exile again, watching the next chapter unfold from the relative discomfort of a leaky cottage near Calais. You told yourself you were done with this war, But history, like lice and taxes, has a way of crawling back. It's 1399, and England's crown is up for grabs once more. Richard II, the boy king who once posed in velvet while others starved, is about to be booted off the throne. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, returns from exile with a small army and a huge grudge. You hear of it while drying your boots over a fire of damp reeds. A travelling merchant mutters over his stew. Henry just walked into London. No fight, just took the damn crown, you nod. It's not shocking. Richard had burned his bridges and forgot to keep the river. You saw it coming years ago when he started executing his own councillors for suggesting tax reform. Henry Bolingbroke becomes Henry IV, a usurper. Yes, but a capable one. And with him comes fresh ambition, old debts, and that familiar taste in the back of your throat, war's aftertaste. France is a fractured puzzle by now. Charles VI's madness has become legend. Some days he thinks he's St. George. Other days he forgets how doors work. Power doesn't lie with him, but with the factions swirling round him, his wife, Queen Isabeau, his uncles, the powerful Dukes of Burgundy and Orleans, and let's not forget the English. They never left entirely. Castles still fly the red cross of St. George. Garrisoned towns flicker like dying candles in a drafty room. You'll drive back into service not as a soldier. Thank whatever gods still listen. But as a letter runner between English-held towns, you carry dispatches written in 3 languages, some sealed with wax, others just smudged with hope. One letter makes you pause. It's from a town in Aquitaine begging for food. Not soldiers, not weapons, just bread. You fold it and keep walking. In 1407, the French Civil War kicks off for real. The Duke of Orleans is murdered, hacked to death in a Paris street. You hear the rumors. 20-some men with axes, blades, even bricks. The killer, John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, who confesses almost immediately and claims it was for the good of France. Sure, and you once stole a chicken for the good of the village. The country splits, Armagnacs versus Burgundians, North versus South, noble against noble. It's like watching a house fire and arguing about the color of the flames. You keep your head down and selling to both sides. Meanwhile, Henry IV is aging poorly. His reign is plagued with rebellions and illness. He dies in 1413, and his son young, golden, and absurdly confident takes the throne as Henry V. Now, this is a king who wants war, and he's not subtle about it. In 1415, he invades France, claiming the throne again, demanding long-forgotten territories, dragging 12,000 men with him. You'd hoped your war days were behind you, but history doesn't retire anyone. It just forgets to bury them. You're hired as a quartermaster for the invasion force. It's not glamorous counting sacks of barley, organizing barrels of salted meat, but it's better than bleeding in a ditch. The army lands in Normandy, and the campaign begins poorly. Dysentery breaks out. Men die in mud, not battle. Morale plummets. Henry insists on marching to Calais anyway. You don't walk. You limp. Then comes Agincourt. You hear at first the clatter of French knights assembling, the low rumble of hooves like thunder rehearsing. You climb a small hill with a handful of bowmen. Not to fight, just to watch, just to witness. The field is soaked from days of rain. Heavy mud sucks at every step. The French, confident in their numbers, 30,000 to England's 6,000, line up with banners and bravado. And then Henry gives the order. The longbowmen plant sharpened stakes and begin to fire. Arrows fall like metal rain. French cavalry charges, bogs down in the mud, and collapses into itself. The next wave rides into the wreckage of the first, and suddenly, the battlefield is a funnel of chaos. Men can't raise their swords. They drown in their own armor. You watch a knight scream as a broken shaft pierces his neck. Another dies with his face pressed into the mud, suffocating not from wounds, But from weight, you take no joy in it. But Henry wins. Completely. France reels. Again. Henry returns to England a hero. But sing. Nobles toast. You sip cheap wine in a corner and think of the widows and Charles VI still mad. Still king in name only is forced to sign the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. It names Henry as heir to the French throne. You blink. England and France, united under one crown. Sure, what could possibly go wrong? You've spent so long watching crowns trade heads like apples at a market stall. It almost feels normal when England suddenly becomes France on paper. At least, it's 1420, and the Treaty of Troyes has done what centuries of conquest couldn't. It names Henry V heir to the French throne, disinherits the Dauphin Charles, the actual son of the Mad King, and even marries Henry off to Catherine of Valois, Charles VI's daughter. How's that for a political marriage? One royal wedding and boom, Europe shifts beneath your feet. But it doesn't feel real. You're stationed in Rouen now, helping to oversee supplies and write ledgers no one bothers to read. The French people don't cheer the treaty. They grit their teeth. They shrug. They hide bread. They bow to English patrols and whisper to each other in doorways. Even Charles VI, the King of France, doesn't seem to grasp what's happened. He signs the treaty, sure, but he also talks to invisible angels and thinks his limbs are made of crystal. One day, you're told he tried to climb a tapestry because he thought it was a staircase to heaven. Still, Henry V seems unstoppable, ruthless in battle, meticulous in planning, charismatic in just the right terrifying way. His soldiers would walk through fire for him, and sometimes they do. But victory doesn't like to stay in one house for too long. Just 2 years later, in 1422, both kings died. Yes, both. Within mere months, Charles VI dies in Paris, finally escaping his crown of madness. And Henry V dies in France, not on a battlefield, but from dysentery. The king who could cut down knights like weeds is felled by a bad belly in a stone room. You don't even have time to feel surprise. One moment the world is neatly divided between two great rulers. The next, it belongs to a baby. Literally. Henry VI, just 9 months old, inherits both England and France. You sigh so loudly that the scribe next to you writes it down by accident. Historians still debate whether this dual inheritance could have worked, whether the crowns could have truly been joined. Some say yes, others say the French would never have accepted it. Treaty or not, you say it never mattered, because what followed was never about treaties. It was about belief. The Dauphin Charles, disinherited and disgraced, still claims the French crown. He refuses to accept Troyes. His supporters call him Charles VII, even though half the kingdom treats him like a ghost. His court flees to Burgess, clinging to legitimacy by its fingernails. And now, the war isn't just about land, it's about identity. One side says God gave them France. The other says France is theirs because they are France. You're too old for this. But then, something strange happens. In 1429, you hear whispers in the taverns and barracks, not about kings, about a girl. They say she wears armor, that she hears saints, that she's been sent to save France not by an army, but by God. At first, you laugh. Who wouldn't? Another mad mystic in a world already filled with them. But then, she wins. Orleans, under siege by the English for months, is broken in just 9 days. The girl, Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc, leads the French with a kind of fire you haven't seen since Agincourt. Only now it burns for the other side. You're assigned to a logistics post. When it happens, you see the chaos ripple through English ranks, the disbelief. How can a peasant girl from Domremy, who speaks with saints and rides like thunder, shatter a siege no knight could breach? She becomes legend while still alive. You watch French morale rise like bread in spring. Flags are raised. Songs are sung. She marches to Reims, and there Charles VII is crowned King of France. Legitimacy, once mocked, is reborn by a girl. You sit on a bench near Rouen, sharpening a quill, and think, this war's about to get weird. It does, because miracles are rarely allowed to live long. You smell smoke before you see it. It's the kind that clings to your clothes, seeps into your lungs, and stays there for days like guilt with a heat source. When the marketplace is unusually quiet this morning, not because it's empty, but because everyone is watching. They've built the pyre with brutal efficiency. Drywood stacked carefully, almost lovingly. Chains rattle as they bind a figure to the post. Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, is 19. You're standing near the back of the crowd, not as a soldier today, not even as a clerk, just a man trying to make sense of how a girl who saved a kingdom is now being burned by it. The English claim she's a heretic, a witch, a cross-dresser. You heard a bishop whisper that last one like it was the worst of her crimes. But everyone knows the real reason. She made people believe. And belief, once weaponized, is more dangerous than any sword. She'd become too powerful. Not politically, she never cared for that. But spiritually, the French followed her like she was prophecy. And the English, they feared her in ways they never feared kings. So they bought her trial with coin and cowardice. They say it was legal. Historians still debate that. They always debate when justice burns someone alive. You see her from a distance, shoulders straight, lips moving in prayer. She's not crying. Her executioner is a grown man. They say he begged forgiveness even as he lit the flame. The fire catches fast. The wind shifts. Someone near you vomits. Someone else kneels. And you, paralyzed by something between awe and nausea, look away only once. When you look back, it's already over. The war doesn't pause. It doesn't even flinch. But something has changed. You can feel it. Joan is dead. But the spirit she awakened is not. Charles VII, the once forgotten Dauphin, now wears his crown with certainty. And the French, newly emboldened, begin pushing back. Not with fury, but with a quiet, relentless confidence. You start seeing French flags in towns you thought were permanently English. Garrison commanders start receiving letters offering surrender terms, not demands, as if the war is unwinding itself backwards. It's not fast, but it's inevitable. The Burgundians, who once allied with England, begin whispering with the French. You're at an inn when someone toasts to old enemies becoming convenient friends. You don't drink. You're transferred to Paris. Now half held by the English, half sold to fear. The city feels like a cracked bell still ringing. But off-key, paranoia hangs in the air like fog. French sympathizers are arrested, executed. You write down their names on official records and then copy them again. In smaller handwriting, in the back of your journal. In 1435, the Treaty of Arras is signed. Burgundy switches sides. England is furious, doomed. You knew it before. Now you see it everywhere. English knights start returning home, not in glory, in silence, landless, forgotten, aged. Some don't even remember why they fought, and yet Henry VI, now of age, but not truly of mind, still wears both crowns. Barely. He visits France in 1431 to be crowned King of France. The locals yawn. You attend the coronation. It's awkward, unattended, rainy. The choir sings off-key. You watch a man with wet feathers in his hat whisper. He looks like a ghost of a king. By 1449, the French take Rouen back. The English, trying to hold Normandy, stumble through a series of losses. You're stationed near Caen, watching supplies vanish and morale collapse like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. And then comes for money. 1450. It's muddy, always muddy. The English try to stop the French advance. They fail. Cannons roar across the field big. Ugly bombards now replacing longbows as the future's favorite tool of destruction. You help drag one cannon into position only for it to sink into the mud and explode once. Just once. That's all it needs. Afterward, you walk among the dead. The French barely lost anyone. The English lost everything men. Guns, and the illusion that they were still a continental power. You don't cry. You don't cheer. You just pack your bag. You've seen this ending coming for years. But endings aren't sudden. They wear away at you, like waves. And this wave has almost finished crushing. The road to Bordeaux is quiet to quiet, which usually means something's about to go very wrong, or even stranger. Completely right. It's 1451, and England is holding on by its fingernails. A few strongholds remain: Gascony, Bordeaux, Calais, but the war is no longer being fought. It's being ended. One reluctant concession at a time. You find yourself in Bordeaux not as a soldier or clerk this time, but as a translator. You've picked up enough French, Latin, and good timing over the decades to be useful, and someone has to help these battered negotiations go somewhere that isn't just another graveyard. When you arrive, the atmosphere is surreal. The city is still loyal to England mostly. It was English held for over 300 years. It's more English than parts of England. They drink ale. They pray in English churches. Some even name their sons Henry and John without irony. But when the French army marches south, the air shifts. It isn't rage, it's resignation. A collective sigh from a city that's finally tired of being loyal to a ghost. Still, the people ask for help. They beg Henry VI to send troops to defend them against all odds. He does. Enter John Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, England's last real war horse. Old, fierce, and somehow still wearing the armor that made him famous 20 years too late. You've met him before. He once drank you under the table and then challenged a tapestry to a duel. Charming. In that you'll probably die next to me sort of way. Talbot lands with a small force in 1452 and retakes Bordeaux. The city cheers, flags wave. You toast cautiously with a group of tired English merchants and try not to think about how temporary it all feels. Spoiler. It is. The French regroup fast. By 1453, they march to Castellon, and Talbot, never one to wait, rides out to meet them. You go to, not to fight, just to witness. You can't stop yourself. The Battle of Castellon begins with hope and ends with thunder. Talbot charges a fortified French camp that's, unfortunately, defended by cannons, lots of them. The French artillery is modern, organized, and horrifyingly effective. When Talbot's horse is shot out from under him, you feel the ground shake. He dies there, a knight from a fading world, struck down by the future. The English army crumbles. The war, at least in France, is over. You return to Bordeaux days later. It's surrendered. Again. This time, there's no cheering. Just silence. Just acceptance. Historians will later say the 100 Years' War ends in 1453. Right there with Castellon. It's a neat ending, but you've lived through it, and you know better. The war never had a clean beginning, and it sure as hell doesn't have a clean end. Because while the fields of France grew quiet, England is about to eat itself alive. Back home, Henry VI is unraveling. He's not mad like Charles VI, not yet, but he's close. He drifts through rooms like a ghost, forgets names, forgets faces in one infamous episode. He reportedly stares at a wall for hours while his kingdom burns. And there's another problem. His queen, Margaret of Anjou, is terrifyingly competent. She doesn't sit quietly while men fail around her. She writes, argues, commands, and she has a son, Edward of Westminster, who she insists will inherit the crown, no matter what. But the nobles don't trust her, or the child, or the king. So begins the wars of the roses. Yes, because one absurdly long war just isn't enough. You've lived through the rise of England in France, the fall of France to a goal, and the complete reversal of every victory you ever marched for. And now you live through civil war. You pack your bag again. Fewer clothes this time, just quills, parchment, and a small knife. You thought the war ended with cannons at Castellon. But here, in England, the war has only just found its next disguise. You spend your next days really waiting for England to remember who she is. Spoiler, she doesn't. It's 1455, and the 100 Years' War is technically over. But now you've stumbled into something even stranger, even pettier. The Wars of the Roses, same swords, different banners, and the worst part, you know everyone involved is technically on the same side. Kind of. Sometimes the House of Lancaster wears red, the House of York wears white. You wear a brown cloak. Keep your head down, and pray no one asks your opinion. You remember Henry VI as the baby who inherited 2 kingdoms. Now, he's a hollow man with a crown too heavy for his neck at court. He smiles politely and agrees with everything. His wife, Margaret of Anjou, runs the show when she's not arguing with nobles or marching an army through the countryside to defend her son's claim to the throne. Opposing her is Richard, Duke of York, a man with better bloodlines, stronger alliances, and the kind of ambition that makes peasants nervous. He doesn't say he wants the throne, at first. But you've read enough letters, seen enough banners quietly stitched in back rooms, to know better. By St. Albans, the first blood is spilled. You're not there, thank God. But you hear it described by a scribe with shaky hands and a nervous stammer. They fought in the streets. He says, not fields, streets. It's a war of assassinations now, courtroom poisonings, skirmishes that look like family reunions gone wrong. You try to leave London, but can't. There are checkpoints everywhere. You forge a pass and pretend to be a chicken merchant. Works surprisingly well. By 1460, the Duke of York is dead, head stuck on a pike with a marking paper crown. You see it on your way to fetch ink from a guild hall and nearly drop your satchel. But your son, Edward, doesn't grieve long. He's tall, charismatic, and the kind of man who can seduce both nobles and barmaids in a single afternoon. He sweeps south with an army of discontent and takes London like it's a summer home. Then, just like that, he declares himself King Edward IV. You expect panic. But the people cheer, because frankly, they're tired of seeing Henry stare at walls. Margaret flees north with her son. Henry is captured and paraded through the streets like a dazed museum exhibit. You watch him pass, surrounded by guards, murmuring prayers to know one. England has a new king. Again. And yet, you feel no triumph. You remember the rain at Crecy, the fire at Rouen, the mud at Agincourt. All those years fighting France to unify a kingdom that can't even decide which cousin gets the fancy chair. You find work as a copyist in York, small shop on a Stow's. You write birth records now instead of casualty lists. You sleep through the night for once. But peace in England is a myth with a short lifespan. In 1470, Edward is overthrown. Yes, overthrown. By a man named Warwick the Kingmaker, who helped put him on the throne in the first place. You can't make this up, or rather you could, but no one would believe it. Henry VI is dragged back out of confinement and told, "You're king again." He nods and asks for soup. The restoration lasts a year. Then Edward returns, marches into London, captures Henry again. This time, Henry's son Margaret's Edward is killed in battle, and Henry, dead, quietly, in the tower. They say illness. You don't ask questions when blood washes down palace stairs. The crown is Edward IV's again. You start drinking more, not because of grief, because of exhaustion. You've lived through kings rising, falling, bleeding, crowning, marrying, burning, dying. You've watched peasants lose sons to foreign wars, then come home to civil ones. You've copied so many royal decrees, they all sound the same. You begin to wonder. What if France won, after all? Because while England tears itself apart, France has been healing, slowly. Charles VII re-established royal authority, built a standing army, reigned in his nobles. You cross the Channel once more in 1475 and hardly recognize it. No flags of St. George, no half-starved garrisons, just France, whole again. You stand in a tavern near Orleans once besieged, now bustling, and realize something painful. France won not by fighting England, but by outlasting her. You're older now, closer to the end than the middle, and England no longer feels like a place you live in, but a place you live around. A kingdom too distracted to know its own reflection. It's 1483. And once again, the throne is wobbling like a drunk on ice. King Edward IV is dead. Sudden, unexpected, drops in the middle of April like a puppet whose strings were cut. He leaves behind a 12-year-old son, Edward V, the bright boy, sharp eyes, steady hands, but none of that matters, because someone else is watching the throne. Someone who knows the shape of power better than most. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the brother of the dead king. Loyal, cold, calculated. You saw him once years ago, speaking softly to a servant who later vanished. You remember the way he said thank you, like it was the end of a sentence, not a courtesy. Richard takes the role of protector, then the role of advisor, then the role of actually. Maybe those two princes in the Tower shouldn't be king at all. Just like that, the boy king Edward V disappears along with his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, two sons of a king, gone. You don't know how. No one really does. Maybe murdered, maybe hidden, maybe both. Historians still debate it like a riddle in a locked room. What you do know is this: Richard crowns himself King Richard III, and the people, they murmur, uneasy, suspicious. You walk the streets of London and see graffiti scratched into church walls, small white roses, barely visible. Someone still remembers York. Someone still waits for justice. Meanwhile, across the Channel, a new name begins to spread. Henry Tudor, a distant descendant of the Lancasters, exiled in Brittany. A man no one took seriously, until now, with both York princes gone. Henry positions himself not as an invader, but as the rightful heir, the last hope to unite a kingdom so fractured it makes pottery shards look solid. You've heard that claim before, but this time it sticks. In 1485, Henry Tudor lands in Wales with a small force and marches inland. You're too old to fight, so you watch from a ridge near Bosworth Field, leaning on a stick that used to be a pike. The field is misty, damp, soggy with women. Richard III rides out in gleaming armor. He looks magnificent. He also looks doomed. The battle unfolds in spasms, betrayals, hesitations. Entire battalions that simply walk away rather than fight. The tide turns quickly, and Richard, brave, brutal, brilliant, charges one last time, hoping to end it himself. He dies in the mud, sword in hand, crown still on his head. They find his body days later, tossed naked over a horse. Someone buries him in a church. Later, someone builds a car park on top of it. Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII. You're there when he enters London. No parade, no gloating, just a tired man on a tired horse, carrying a kingdom that feels like it's been broken into too many pieces to reassemble. But he tries. He marries Elizabeth of York, uniting the red rose and the white, Lancaster and York, papering over a century of blood with a single wedding. It's smart, it's cautious, it's effective. And Perhaps it's the ending the war didn't know it needed. You visit the countryside one spring, walking past fields that once hosted battles now dotted with sheep. Boys climb trees where archers once perched. No one says the word siege anymore. Even France, across the water, seems like another lifetime. You hear rumors of Charles VIII, then Louis XII. But they no longer matter to England. You sit under a tree with a warm cup of cider, and for the first time in your life, you almost believe in peace. Almost. Because even now, late at night, you still dream of Creasy, of Joan's ashes, of mud and banners, of men who believed crowns were worth dying for. And you wonder if they ever truly were. They say a kingdom at peace forgets how to sharpen its swords. But you haven't forgotten, and you doubt you ever will. It's now the final years of the 1400s. The world is changing slowly, stubbornly. People begin talking about trade instead of tribute, about voyages rather than vassals. Ships leave Bristol whispering rumors of distant lands, of westward oceans that don't end in sea serpents but in gold. The old war, the 100 Years' War, has become a bedtime story told by men who were never there, except you were there. And you remember every scream, every muddy field, every banner burned to ash. You live now in a town near Canterbury, copying manuscripts for a monastery that pretends to forget how often its walls were looted during the war. You still keep your journal pages yellowed, ink faded, binding cracked, but no one asks about it. No one wants to talk about siege towers or longbow volleys anymore. They want trade ledgers, songs, and taxes tallied. England is still fragile. No. Henry VII, for all his caution, rules with a tight grip. He doesn't trust nobles. He doesn't trust old loyalties. He shouldn't. You saw what they did to Richard II, and Henry VI, and Richard III. He builds peace not on hope, but on paperwork treaties, rests, marriage alliances, and still, pretenders rise. In 1487, a boy named Lambert Simnel claims he's the Earl of Warwick Yorkist royalty. He's 10, a puppet for rebel nobles. You don't see the battle, but you see the aftermath. Heads on spikes, London learns quickly not to cheer for ghosts. Then comes Perkin Warbeck, another fraud. This one claiming to be Richard of Shrewsbury, one of the missing princes from the Tower. For a while, it works. He gains support in Ireland, France, even Burgundy. You hear the rumors and almost want to believe them. After all, you never saw the princes die. No one did. But Warbeck fails, captured, paraded, imprisoned, eventually hanged. By then, you stopped hoping for truth. The crown survives, not because people believe in it, but because they're too tired to resist it anymore. The last Plantagenet dies. The first Tudor rules, and still, you carry the memory of France on your back like a second spine. One afternoon, while gathering ink from a nearby abbey, a boy no older than 15 asks you if the 100 Years' War was real. Of course, you say, flatly. But how could one war last so long? He asks. You stare at him, then out the window. It didn't, you reply. It lasted many times, with breaks for breathing, and dying, and pretending we were finished. But the hate, that lasted just fine. He nods, not really understanding. Later that night, you walk past an old oak tree, one you once stood beneath in 1415, waiting for orders at Harfleur. It's still there, gnarled, but rooted. You touch its bark and wonder if it remembers you. In the distance, church bells toll. Peace, they say. A new age, a kingdom rebuilt. You believe it, or at least, you pretend to, because for now, the fields are quiet, and you're still alive. It's strange how quickly the living forget the wars that built the roads beneath their feet. You walk now among people who carry no scars, at least none earned in armor. The boys chasing dogs through the alleys of London don't know the name Creasy, or what it means to have archers behind you and French cavalry in front. You overhear a fishmonger once misattribute Agincourt to Julius Caesar. You don't correct him. What would be the point? It's 1509, and England has a new king again. Henry VIII, son of Henry VII, is crowned, and the people cheer like they've never cheered before. He's tall, young, handsome, and, worst of all, hopeful. You watch the procession from a shaded alley, arms folded, one leg throbbing with old wounds that never fully healed. He waves like someone who's never seen a war. You almost envy the dot Henry promises a new age, peace, prosperity, unity. He marries Catherine of Aragon, throws tournaments, hosts feasts so grand the Thames practically sparkles. But you see it already, the storm behind his eyes, the itch. The same itch that all kings seem to carry, the hunger for legacy. Not just to rule, but to be remembered. You shake your head. You've seen how memory works. You've seen saints burned, kings forgotten, castles traded like dice. You've read letters from widows who couldn't remember which year their sons vanished. You've written the names of men in ledgers only to cross them out weeks later with a single word. Missing dot Henry built ships, big ones, decorated like floating cathedrals. He arms them to the teeth. You hear rumors of French tensions rising again, of border disputes, of insult and honor, and all those delightful excuses people invent when they need a reason to swing swords. You know better. The 100 Years' War ended with a French victory. That much is certain. The English hold on to Calais still like a tooth that won't fall out, but the rest is gone. Bordeaux, Normandy, Gascony gone. And yet, you hear tavern stories of reclaiming France, of a king who will do what his ancestors could not. They speak of Henry VIII like a figure of destiny. You remember Henry V. You remember what happened the last time England believed in a king too much. You still keep your journal. You filled it now, cover to cover, and as you write your final entry, your hand slower. Your breath thinner, you think back to Joan, to Talbot, to mud, to feasts, to burning arrows, to a blind king charging into death with a smile. You think of the war not as a single thing, but as a presence, a shadow that lived over generations, not always fighting, but always there, 100 years. No doubt it was 100 wounds, each reopened by pride, each left to rot by politics, each healed if at all by time. You close the book, outside, a bell rings, church, maybe, or a ship departing for Spain. You'll never know, because this, finally, is your peace. And tonight, the world can move on without you. You're gone now, but your journal survives. It sits quietly on a shelf in the back of a scribe's home in Southwark, wedged between a missal and a treatise on Latin grammar. No one touches it at first. To plain, to stained. The ink faded in places, the pages walked by time, and in one corner, a faint ring where someone once rested a mug of ale, possibly during the siege of Calais. Years pass. The scribe dies. His son finds the journal, leaves through it, and can't make sense of the handwriting. He uses it to press flowers. The book smells like lavender for 50 years after by the 1600s. It resurfaces in a university library, catalogued under miscellaneous correspondence. It sits unread while men in ruffled collars argue about Shakespeare and Francis Bacon. And still, the pages endure. Inside, your words wait patiently. They tell no grand narrative, no royal decrees, no songs of triumph, just memory, just presence. You were there, and somehow. That's enough. By the 1700s. The story of the 100 Years' War has been flattened into names and dates. Creasy, Poitiers, Agincourt, Edward, Henry, Charles. No one remembers what the rain smelled like the morning before the lombos sang. No one remembers how soft the mud was under Orleans after Joan's banner fell for the last time. They remember winners. You remembered faces, eventually. A young historian finds the journal. She reads it cover to cover, twice in silence. She writes nothing at first. She simply sits with it later. She will describe it as a slow-burning grief wrapped in muddy boots, and still. The war doesn't speak. It no longer needs to, because the war is over. The fields have grown green again. Calais is French. England has turned inward. Its kings now battling ink instead of blood. France remembers Joan as a saint. England pretends she never existed. And you are not a name carved into a monument. You are a witness, and in a world too eager to glorify conflict, perhaps that is the highest role anyone can serve. So, if someone ever asks how war could last 100 years, let them read your pages. Let them hear the breath between the battles, the silence after the victory, the laughter behind the gates. Because wars don't last 100 years, people do. And that is the tragedy. And that is the triumph, and that is the truth. And yet, even with the war's bones buried deep beneath the soil of two nations, the ghosts don't stay still. You walk through Calais in your dreams, yes. You still dream and you swear the stones remember your boots. The narrow alleys echo with ghostly English curses, even though French merchants now peddle olives and silk in their place. You see a boy playing with a stick, mimicking a knight, yelling words he doesn't understand. St. George. Then he laughs and switches to Vive la France. You smile. Because that's what peace looks like. Confused joy. The new world moves quickly. Faster than horses. Faster than quills. Ships now cross oceans instead of channels. The Pope no longer commands as he once did. And a German monk is hammering problems onto doors like nails into heaven. Ideas are traveling faster than swords ever did. You'd be impressed if you weren't so tired. They're calling it a renaissance, a rebirth. You're not sure what's been born. But you know what had to die to make room for it. Daughters for England. The Tudors flourish. Henry VIII grows impatient, then cruel, then famous. He'll rewrite religion to chase a son. He'll build palaces and burn wives. But all of that is still ahead. In this moment. You're sitting in a garden outside a small abbey. Hands folded. Eyes closed. It's quiet. Not battlefield quiet, the kind that hums before arrows fly, but real quiet. Birds wind. And nuns softly humming inside the chapel. You can feel the warmth on your face, and for once, you don't mistake it for fever. And then, like always, your mind drifts backward. You remember a king on a throne too large, the shimmer of Joan's armor in sunlight, the sound of laughter during a siege, not madness, not despair, but the strange resilience of people who have lost everything and still find something to smile about. That was the war no one writes about. The small moments. When you shared bread with a French boy you'd later have to fight. When you buried a soldier with his enemy's rosary in his hand. When a blind king rode into a storm he couldn't see. And somehow, you understood him. You wonder what you meant to history. Probably nothing. You were never a lord, never a general. You didn't sign treaties or win crowns. You just lived, and somehow survived. And now, as the sun sits on and impossibly gentle, you realize something. You were the war, not its cause, not its purpose, but its pulse. You carried it, endured it, outlasted it. And that means something. It has to. So you take one last breath and let it go. You are not here anymore, but your story continues not in parades or textbooks, but in the bones of villages rebuilt on the ash of old sieges, in the pots worn by soldiers who marched until their souls fell out of their boots, in a field somewhere between Poitiers and Limoges. A farmer tills soil that once soaked up blood like ink into vellum. He doesn't know your name, but he's walking where you once crawled. and the soul remembers. It's 1530 now. Though you wouldn't recognize it, England is changing violently, beautifully, stupidly. Henry VIII has broken from Rome. He calls himself the supreme head of the Church of England now. And if that sounds like something invented during a fever dream, it probably was. Monasteries close. Monks are sent out into the world like seeds on the wind. You imagine the abbey where your last words were written has been emptied, or ransacked, or burned. Perhaps your journal survived. Perhaps it didn't. But either way, the war you lived through has become a legend, a shape, a myth. They've painted over the old stories. Now it's all noble England versus villainous France. Banners, heraldry. Romances written by men who never touched a sword, but sure do love the idea of one. You wouldn't recognize their war, because your war had lice, not luster. Your war had freezing toes, and spoiled grain, and a boy sobbing in the arms of a dying man who didn't speak his language. Your war was a blind king on a horse, a saint in chains. A treaty signed with fingers that shook from exhaustion rather than diplomacy. There's a statue of Henry V now, in full armor, gazing nobly toward the sky. You want to tell them he died of dysentery, but his son was too young, too quiet, too broken to ever hold what his father gave him. But the statue will stand anyway. People need their heroes, and you were never that, but you were real. That has to count for something. The men who rebuilt France after the war didn't build monuments. They built homes. They planted orchards. They taught their children to fear the sound of distant hoofbeats. And in England, the families who lost sons to campaigns they didn't understand stopped naming their children after kings. At least for a while, because eventually, even grief gets tired. The war faded not because it ended, but because people stopped having the strength to care. And so, one morning, history turned its head and never looked back. You're not in the story anymore, but you're still in it. You're the breath between battles, the pause between treaties. The echo beneath church bells that ring long after the pews have emptied. It's 1570, and Europe has changed its clothes entirely. England is ruled by Elizabeth I, a queen in every sense of the word. Sharp-tongued, sharp-witted, wearing the crown like it was designed for her and not. Say, inherited through a bloody chain of disasters. Under her, England has flourished, or at least found new ways to pretend everything is fine. France, still chaotic, still beautiful, still constantly trying to decide whether it's ruled by sword, scripture, or whoever's loudest that week. But the war you knew the 100 Years' War is now little more than an argument between scholars. They teach it in grammar schools now. They argue over whether it began in 1337 or perhaps a little earlier. Depending on how you define sovereignty, they ask, was it really one war or a series of conflicts? They try to find meaning in what was, to you, just endless. You want to laugh. Because no one who ever lived through it asked for meaning. They asked for food, for warmth, for letters from home, for the war to end just long enough to bury a friend before fighting again. Some even asked to be forgotten. And now, their footnotes, you wonder what they'd think of that. You imagine a room of modern scholars debating whether Joan of Arc was more political symbol or religious fanatic, sipping wine under oil paintings of battles they never saw. You wonder if anyone ever talks about the boy she helped carry water to the ramparts, or the English soldier who said a prayer when he saw her fall. Probably not. You live now only in margins. If your journal survived, it's shelved behind glass. If not, then maybe someone copied a line or two. Maybe someone misquoted you in a book no one will finish. You don't mind. Because in a strange way, this is peace. The world is moving on. And while it does, it drags the memory of you behind it, not like a burden, but like a shadow. You were one of millions who lived, fought, survived, or didn't. Your story wasn't the loudest, but it was true. And in a century so full of noise, that's worth remembering. You fade further now, not into darkness, but into quiet. And honestly, it's beautiful. They call it history now. The war you walked through barefoot and bloodied, slept through beneath broken cots, survived with chipped teeth and half-healed wounds. They write it in ink now, clean, precise, lined up in columns and timelines. Like it all made sense at the time. You'd almost be flattered if it didn't feel like watching someone turn your life into a children's play. By 1600, the world has redrawn its maps. Empires bloom like mold across distant continents. Ships bear flags you don't recognize, and people who have never lifted a sword speak confidently about England's glorious past. The war is distant now. You hear it in the language. The 100 Years' War has become epic, not exhausting, not cruel, just grand. Poets romanticize it. Playwrights twist it into verse. A young man named William Shakespeare even writes of kings you marched behind. He gives them speeches they never gave, dreams they never had. You can't decide if it's a kindness or a betrayal, but it's certainly fiction. You remember Henry V, not as a hero, but as a man who once threw up behind a chapel wall from nerves before Agincourt. You held his helmet as he cursed a bishop under his breath. You remember Charles VII being crowned in Reims, flanked by priests who'd once mocked him as the king of burghers. His knees were shaking. You offered him a flask of wine. He didn't drink it, too focused, or too afraid. You remember Joan, standing barefoot in wet grass before a skirmish, whispering to herself, not to saints, not to God, but to her horse, promising it a feast of apples if they both made it out alive. None of that made it into the plays, and yet, somehow, you're still there, woven between the lines, not named, not praised, but present, because you are always the part of the story no one noticed. The witness, the wanderer, the weary. You drift now through a world that no longer needs you. Towns rise where camps once smoldered. Markets bustle in places where men once died unnamed. You walk unseen through new cities and listen to people complain about the price of fish, about plague rumors, about the Spanish threat. You smile. They're free to worry about other things now, because your war is over. And though the flags have changed, the language has softened, and the memory has blurred, the truth is still there. You endured. And in the end, that's all the war ever demanded. Not victory, not glory. Just endurance. The war's echoes have thinned now, like music drifting from a distant window you can no longer see. It's 1625. England buries a King James I and raises another, Charles I, who wears the crown with stiff posture and a nervous smile. He doesn't know it yet, but he's already marching toward his own unraveling. Another war is coming, a civil one. You feel it building in the air like a thunderstorm far off over the channel. But none of that is your concern anymore. Your concern is this quiet bench in a church courtyard, where moss overtakes the stone and children play where once they prayed. You're only a shadow now, the final traces of a memory grown gentle. But every so often, you find yourself drawn to places once soaked in rage and steel, and they're blooming. Creasy, where longbows once cut down nights like hay in harvest, now hosts vineyards. The soil grows wine where it once grew blood. You sit beneath a trellis and watch the farmer's daughter braid herbs into her mother's hair. She has never heard of John of Bohemia, the blind king who died trying to honor a code written in a different world. And she never will. Ruyen, where flames devoured a girl in armor, now bakes bread that makes strangers weep. You drift past a baker's stall and feel warmth you haven't known in centuries. A young boy carries flour on his shoulders like it's a night's burden. proud and humming, unaware he's walking across cobblestones where faith once screamed and failed. And Bordeaux still remembers you. You see it in the curve of the harbour, the slope of the roof lines that once bore English banners. A woman sells fish beside the quay and curses the price of salt. She's English in ancestry, French in everything else, and blissfully uninterested in the distinction. The people here no longer choose sides. They choose life, and in that, they've already won. You've walked through centuries now, soft-footed and mostly forgotten. You've watched names become legends, and legends become jokes. You've listened to speeches that would have sounded mad on a battlefield but sound magnificent in a theatre. You understand. Now, what they never told you, the war was never truly about land, or kings, or crowns. It was about who could endure the longest without losing themselves. You open your journal again, yes, the same one. You never stopped writing. It's filled with smudged reflections, ink stains, and the kind of truths people avoid putting in history books. And on this page, you write one more line. The war lasted 100 years, but I lasted longer. Then you close it. You walk down the hill from the old abbey where no monks remain, past graves whose stones have lost their names, toward a field where children chase a dog through the ruins of a fortress wall. And finally you rest. Because no one is chasing you anymore. Because no one needs your memory to carry the war. Because they have something better now. Peace. Time no longer moves for you in hours or days, it moves in centuries. Like a tide that forgets it was ever a wave. It's 1701. And Europe is preparing itself for another war, this time over the Spanish throne. You don't bother learning the names. You know the rhythm already. The prince dies. A cousin claims too much. And suddenly the fields fill with young men whose mothers never wanted them to hold swords. You've seen this play before. It's just wearing a different costume now. But you're not interested in the soldiers anymore. You're interested in the spaces they never reached. There's a farm in Normandy, small, quiet, inherited by a family that's forgotten how long their roots go. You walk the field behind their cottage where an English knight once died with a French arrow in his chest. His blood watering wheat that still grows now. You remember the knight's name. He had a daughter in York, a song he hummed when nervous, and a birthmark shaped like a fish on his left arm. He died holding a letter he never sent. Now that patch of land grows lavender. In London, near the old tower, a young man flushed with the Enlightenment writes essays on the nature of conflict. He's never seen war. He quotes Cicero, argues the merits of monarchs, and believes firmly that war is a matter of economics. You hover near his shoulder as he writes. He sips coffee and scratches at his powdered wig, completely unaware that the ink he uses was made in a shop where you once scrawled down casualty numbers during a siege. You almost tap him on the shoulder, but he wouldn't hear you, because memory is not taught. It's earned. And most don't want to earn yours. In New Orleans, they build a statue. Jeanne d'Arc, finally, bronze, noble, clean. She stares down the boulevard as if daring the city to forget her again. Tourists gather. Priests nod. A child tosses a coin at her feet like she's wishing well. No one mentions how she smelled of smoke and steel. How her voice cracked when she prayed. How she once asked you, softly, if her hands would be enough to save a country. They were, and they weren't. You sit in the square for hours. No one sees you. A priest lights a candle. It flickers. You feel something shift. Not grief. Not pride. Just release. Because they remember her now. And if they remember her, maybe they'll remember the rest of you, too. Not just the kings, but the ones who cooked meals during sieges, who stitched up wounds in silence, who buried the unnamed and whispered apologies to the dead. Maybe memory isn't about being carved in marble. Maybe it's about never being truly erased. And if so, you've already won. The world has begun to forget you properly now, which is, in its own quiet way, a form of peace. It's 1803, and war returns to Europe like a familiar fever, this time wearing the name Napoleon. France, once the battlefield you bled across, now churns with empire dreams and cannon fire. England watches, waits, and then as always marches to war again. You know the drill. You stand on the cliffs of Dover, watching sails vanish into fog. Each ship bearing another generation who thinks they'll end war with one more good fight. You don't follow them, not this time. Because this war isn't yours. Your boots never touched Trafalgar. Your hands never held a musket. And your ghosts Crecy, Poitiers, Orleans, Rouen have finally begun to rest. Even the land no longer remembers where it was wounded. You walk through Reims once more. The cathedral stands proud, restored. Inside, candles flicker beneath soaring arches. Tourists trace the stonework. No one speaks of Charles VII anymore. No one remembers the mud on the hem of his coronation robe. No one knows you helped carry it just for a moment because a stable boy had fallen ill. That detail didn't make it into the records. But it lives here, in you, and in this hush of memory. You begin to feel something rare. Detachment. You are not bitter. You are not mournful. You are grateful. Because even in a world that doesn't know your name, you once mattered. Once held a banner. Once held a man's hand as he died and told him his daughter would be fine. Even if you weren't sure she would, you pass by a museum in Paris. Inside, a display on medieval warfare. The placard reads, "The 100 Years' War 1337 to 1453. A dynastic conflict between England and France." You smile. That's one way to put it. But you know better. It wasn't just dynasties. It was a farmer in Picardy hiding his grain beneath floorboards. It was a woman in Bordeaux who taught her child to speak both French and English in case either army showed up. It was a boy at Formani who prayed to both saints and sinners before dying with a stone in his shoe. It was all of them. And it was you. You linger at the edge of the exhibit, watching people pass by without reading. Their eyes are already on the Napoleonic uniforms further down the corridor. That's fine. You are not here to be noticed anymore. You're here to remember, and to ensure that forgetting never becomes absolute. It's now 1914, and the world does something you never thought possible. It goes to war again, not between kings this time, but between entire nations, and not over crowns, but over maps, pride, and treaties that read like suicide notes in formal dress. You linger near the trenches in northern France, and you don't recognize the war. Not really. Gone are the longbows and lances. Now it's barbed wire, machine guns, and men buried under mud they were never meant to cross. The names are different. The flags changed. But the eyes are the same. You've seen that hunted look before at Crecy, Agincourt, Castellon. But here, in the choking fumes of mustard gas, in the endless shelling that turns soil to slurry, it's magnified. You move along the western front like a ghost among ghosts. You kneel beside a British soldier, no older than 15. As he whispers to his mother with a mouth full of blood, you hold the hand of a French officer who calls for God. Then silence. You sit beside a German boy who clutches a photograph and forgets to cry. You do not belong here, and yet you've never been more present. Because this is the final form of the war you once lived. Not a king's ambition, not a crown's inheritance, but mechanized despair. Back in London, historians begin drawing parallels. They compare trench maps to the battlefields of the 100 Years' War. They quote Shakespeare's Henry V in recruitment posters. Once more unto the breach, dear friends. But you know these breaches are not noble. They do not close. They only widen, still. You understand something most men in this war do not. This too will end, and after it does, the world will try once again to forget. When it does, You walk the fields of Flanders, where poppies will soon grow. You whisper names no one else remembers. You sit on the shattered stones of an old abbey, the same one where you once slept in 1357, shivering under Lycian wool, praying for a dry night. Now it's just rubble, craters, and rusting helmets. A century later, someone will find that helmet, clean it, display it, give it a label, but not a story. Not your story. You pass through when again in 1919, rebuilt, scarred, stubborn. A little girl sells violets outside a church, and as a man in uniform drops a coin in her hand, you hear her ask, "Was there always war here?" He laughs. No, not always. He's wrong, of course. But you let it go, because by now, you understand. It's not your job to argue anymore. It's your job to remember. Quietly, completely. And maybe make peace with the forgetting. The world spins faster now. Too fast for swords, too fast for saints, but not too fast for a memory. It's 1944, and war has returned to France, this time by sky, sea, and steel. You drift over the cliffs of Normandy, watching as Allied ships stretch across the channel like iron teeth. The beach as Omaha, Sword will soon be soaked again. Not with glory, with history repeating itself through different uniforms and louder thunder. You are a relic among relics now, but you recognize something in the soldiers' faces as they leap from boats into the surf. Not courage, not even fear, but determination, the kind that comes not from oaths, but from something simpler. Purpose. They're not here for kings. They're here for homes, for mothers, for lives broken by tyrants who wear no crowns but still build thrones out of bones. The land remembers you, even if they don't. Beneath the boots of soldiers from America, Canada, Britain, and France, the soul still whispers of longbows and cavalry, of banners raised and burned, of a girl who heard saints and never backed down. In one village near Caen, an old woman lights a candle on her windowsill before the bombers come. She doesn't know it, but she lives atop what was once an English outpost in 1430. You helped build its ramparts. You were there when it fell. Now it's a bakery, and the bread smells divine. You pass through Orleans again. The Joan statue still stands bullet-pocked but defiant. A German soldier once carved his name into its space. But no one remembers him. They remember her. You sit beneath her gaze and think of the pyre, the smoke, the silence after. And now, just like then, France is liberating itself, brick by brick, soul by soul. You follow the soldiers as they march inland. This is not your war. You do not belong here, but you walk anyway, because you recognize in their footsteps something achingly familiar. The need to hold on to something more than survival, to mean something. You pass an English officer scribbling in a notebook near the front. He's sketching trenches. You glance over his shoulder. For a moment, your eyes meet his. He doesn't see you, but he shivers, just once. You smile. Later, when the fighting moves east, you return to Calais. You sit on a seawall that didn't exist in 1450 and watch the waves crash against the modern port. The air smells like salt and diesel. The city still stands. So do you. And though no one reads your journal anymore, though the parchment has likely turned to dust and the ink into ghost lines, you know your story lives on in this. The way a child wraps a bandage around his sister's scraped knee. The way a stranger shares bread with a refugee. The way people keep choosing to rebuild, even when the world keeps giving them reasons not to. That was the point of your war, wasn't it? Not to win, but to outlast. To endure long enough so someone else wouldn't have to. And as tanks roll eastward and church bells ring again in liberated towns, you feel it. For the first time in centuries, they just might succeed. By now, you are made of memory more than anything else. The war you survived has receded into legend. The fires you warmed your hands beside are cold ashes buried under highways, parking lots, vineyards, and cathedrals. But you walk still, not with purpose, not even with pain, but with a kind of sacred patience. It's 1961, and men are launching themselves into the sky, into space. You stand beneath a black and white television in a shop window on the Rue de Rivoli, watching a grainy rocket slice through the clouds as a French boy presses his nose against the glass. Eyes wide with awe, he says, "They say we'll live on the moon one day." You murmur, "We once thought we'd live in peace." But of course, he can't hear you. And you don't blame him, because his war wasn't yours. His memory starts somewhere around Normandy and skips over Agincourt, Crécy, and Poitiers like forgotten stones in a dried-up river. His France speaks of de Gaulle, not Charles VII, of resistance fighters, not mystic girls in armor. Yet when you pass through Rouen, you feel something shift. There's a school there, built near the market square where they burned Joan. Children laugh in the courtyard, playing soccer, shouting at each other in slang you don't understand. One girl stands near the fence, daydreaming, one hand wrapped round the post like a banner she's not yet brave enough to raise. She wears a medallion. You can't quite see the saint etched into it, but the way she stands, chin lifted, legs dusted in chalk, watching the sky, you could swear she's not waiting for recess to end. She's waiting for a sign. You smile, because somewhere deep in the marrow of the land, the story you lived through still hums, not as fear, not even as pain, but as lesson. By now, you're little more than a presence that passes unnoticed between centuries. You sit beneath restored spires in Reims, your back against stone that was once rubble. You sip imaginary wine on the banks of the Loire, remembering real laughter under real stars. You kneel beside a plaque that honors the unknown soldier and whisper the names no one else knows. And still, the world moves on. Faster now, glass cities rise where forests once sheltered arches. Trains slice through lands you once walked for months, and politics are fought in microphones. Not moats, you think. Maybe this is what victory actually looks like, not a crown, not a flag, but a world that doesn't need to remember you to be better because of you. Maybe, but just to be sure. You whisper the names again. See Arié, Poitiers, Orleans, Agincourt, Castellon. And then your own. Not because anyone is listening, but because you are. It is now 1994. And France is celebrating 50 years since the D-Day landings. Veterans, what's left of them, gather in their wheelchairs and polished medals, staring out across the beaches where memory and salt water still mix in the tide. Presidents shake hands. Priests bless monuments. Children wave small flags, not quite understanding what they're cheering for. You walk among them unnoticed. You always do, but today feels different. There's reverence in the air, not triumph, a strange stillness. You pass a Canadian soldier bent low beside a grave, whispering something into the grass. A woman nearby sings a hymn in German. In the crowd, a French boy holds the hand of his English grandfather and points out where the sea turns grey. They all speak different languages, but their silence sounds the same. You drift toward Bayeux, where the ancient tapestry lives, the one that tells of an even older war. Long before yours, it's still there, behind glass, carefully lit. Its threads still bright with bloodless battle and crowned ambition. You remember looking at it once during a lull in the 100 Years' War and thinking, this is how we're remembered, stitched into stories by people who were never there now. There's another tapestry being woven not with thread, but with pixels, books, films. Your war has become a backdrop in documentaries, a reference in classrooms. In some, you're a villain. In others, you're forgotten, but never real. They say history is written by the victors, but memory is kept by the quiet. You walk through Paris at dusk. The streets have changed. But the light hasn't. The golden hue still falls on stone like an apology. A couple leans against Pont Neuf, whispering poetry into the wind. Nearby, a man plays accordion, while a dog sleeps at his feet. No one here knows you. And that's okay. Because now, you are not burdened by being remembered. You are sustained by the world that has grown past needing to. You pass a bookstore and notice a new volume in the window. The 100 Years' War, a legacy of division and endurance. You chuckle. A little dryly. You were there, you lived it, and yet, somehow, even you aren't sure what it meant anymore. You once thought it was about land, then crowns, then pride, then faith. Now you know better. It was about time. Who gets it? Who wastes it? Who survives it? And you did. Somehow. And maybe that's all you ever needed to do. You lean against a wall in Rue Saint-Anna, watching the sun disappear behind chimneys and satellite dishes, and you whisper a single sentence into the fading light. I was here. No one hears you. But the stones remember. They always have. It is the early hours of 2025, and the world is so fast now it barely touches the ground. Cities hum like circuits. People walk past each other speaking into invisible air. News is measured in minutes. Memories are outsourced to machines. The past, a swipeable feed, a thumbnail, a bullet point. You stroll through London, mostly unrecognized by anything except the river. The Thames still remembers you. She always did. You pass beneath the tower. Now a tourist destination where school children laugh aloud and take selfies in front of stone walls that once held kings in fear. You trace your fingers across the gate where Henry VI once passed silently into history. No one notices. You step inside a museum. A dimly lit exhibit on medieval conflicts. You expect the usual. Chainmail behind glass, a model of a trebuchet, a blurry CGI rendering of Agincourt narrated by a disembodied British accent. But then there it is, a panel, small, modest. During the 100 Years' War, countless individuals, many unnamed, lived, suffered, and survived between the milestones of history. Their stories are largely lost, and beneath it, a replica journal, faded script, no name, no crest, just this line. The war lasted 100 years. I lasted longer. You freeze. It isn't your handwriting. Not exactly. But it's yours. Someone copied it, preserved it, remembered it. Your hand brushes the case. You almost speak. Almost. But instead, you simply breathe, a gesture as sacred now as it was when knights swore oaths beneath torn banners and peasants whispered prayers in smoldering fields. You leave the museum and walk along the south bank, where lovers huddle in coats, and the old skyline blinks with glass and ambition. And as you pass a street performer playing green sleeves on a battered violin, you realize the war is finally gone. No more cavalry. No more people bulls. No more sieges or saints burning for being too loud. All that remains is you. The quiet proof that survival is its own legacy. That endurance can outlast even empire. That one life, lived through the storm, can be a history all its own. You pause on a bridge. Below, the water murmurs stories older than any monument. You close your eyes, you smile. And for the first time since 1337, you let the war go. You drift now not through towns or battlefields, but through memory itself, suspended in a realm where time is soft round the edges. History no longer moves in straight lines. It loops, frays, braids. You exist somewhere between footnotes and folklore. Not forgotten, but not fully known, and honestly. That's a kind of peace the living rarely earn. You find yourself back in Gascony. Though no map calls it that anymore, the names have changed. But the hills are the same. The wind still moves like breath over the same stones, and on this evening, the air carries music, a wedding. You step through a grove toward a stone chapel. where laughter spills like wine. Guests gather in a courtyard strung with lights. Somewhere, someone plays a lute, yes, a lute. Though now it's called something else and plugged into something humming with electrons. You listen, not to the music, to the words between songs, languages blending, accents crisscrossing, English, French, a little Italian. Someone curses softly in Catalan. You smile, because this tangle of tongues is exactly what the war tried to stop for over 100 years, and yet, here it is, flourishing. You watch the bride dance barefoot, her dress tangled in ivy. She doesn't know her great-great-great something once died at Poitiers, doesn't know her name traces back to a village sacked in 1356, and doesn't need to, because her life is not a burden. It's a blessing you helped carry forward. After the music slows, an old man reads poetry. You expect Shakespeare, maybe Chaucer, but instead, he reads a passage from a journal found centuries ago in an abbey ruin. It begins, "I thought the war would make me a name. Instead, it made me a witness. The crowd quiets. No one claps. Not yet. Because they feel it. The weight behind those words. The ghost of the century that bled itself out so nights like this could exist without fear. And you are more than remembered. You are felt. Not as a warrior, not as a name, but as a foundation. You fade before the song ends. Not because you're finished, but because you finally, truly, become part of everything. The stars blink above. The war is long gone, but you endure. It's been nearly 7 centuries since the first warhorse stepped into Flanders under a banner embroidered with lions. Since England's crown looked eastward and declared France owed to it by blood and birthright. And now, you're in a library. Not just any library, an archive sealed in climate-controlled glass and humming electronics. A place where scholars wear latex gloves to touch old pages, where memory is indexed and barcoded, filed by decimal and date. A young historian stands hunched over a touchscreen, eyes scanning digital reproductions of manuscripts once damp with rainwater and mud. She scrolls past treaties, battlefield reports, people decrees and stops on something small, a scrap of parchment, handwriting faded to near illegibility. The metadata calls it fragment of unknown origin. Mid-15th C. It's just a few lines. The rain at Castellon was warm. I was too tired to be afraid. Someone next to me whispered the wrong prayer. The girl leans closer, mouth half open, as if she can hear the words spoken. She prints the fragment, posts it above her desk. Weeks later, it becomes part of her dissertation, Human Witness, the unrecorded voices of the 100 Years' War. She will give talks, she will write articles, and no one will know it was you, but it will still be you. You will move through her words, her voice, her certainty that history is not only kings and battles, but choices and silences and the shape of grief over time. She writes, the 100 Years' War is often taught as a war of crowns. But if we listen carefully, it sounds more like a war of echoes of ordinary people who kept walking long after the trumpets stopped. You never wept for kings, but you weep for that line, because someone finally heard you. Not with fanfare, not with monuments. With attention. You leave the archive quietly. Outside, a girl in a blue coat leans against a fountain, reading. She underlines a passage in a paperback, then looks up toward a sky too wide to hold memory. And yet somehow it does. You walk away, and the wind carries no banners, just the faintest whisper of your footsteps, and for once, that's enough. You are hardly formed now, just a current beneath the skin of history. Not a ghost, not a voice, but something quieter. Recognition. The soul's nod toward what once was. It is 2089, and the world is wrapped in glass, light, and questions no one would have dared to ask in your time. Borders blur, languages blend, nations still exist, but mostly for paperwork. What matters now is connection networks that cross oceans instantly. Empathy delivered in real time. Memories streamed and archived with more care than any monarch ever received. And yet, war still whispers. In some corners. It still shouts. You pass through a refugee camp outside what was once Dijon. The name on the sign has changed. The stories haven't. A child sharpens a stick into a blade. A grandmother sings a lullaby that hasn't been sung since Gascony burned. You recognize it, and yet no one calls this 100 Years' War. Not yet. Because they haven't named it yet. You keep walking. In a school in Montpellier. A history I projects holograms of battlefields long dissolved. Students walk through animated recreations of Agincourt, Crécy, Poitiers. You stand at the edge of the scene, watching children reach out to touch smoke that isn't real, blood that never stains. One asks, why did they fight so long? The AI answers, to decide who had the right to rule France. You want to shout, to interrupt, but you no longer have a mouth. So you linger. And when the last student leaves the room, a janitor pauses by the projection. He stares at the field, at the archers frozen in digital air, and he whispers, not to you but to himself. My great-grandfather said our family came from here, that we had to leave after the war. He doesn't know which war, but you do. You follow him out into the evening. Neon glows on cobblestones. Drones zip overhead. Somewhere, a newsfeed scrolls headlines about peace negotiations between planetary colonies. But here, on Earth, in the country once called France, a man still carries the weight of something he never lived through, and that, you realize, is the end of forgetting. Not monuments, not books, but instinct, a human hunger to make meaning from memory. Even if the names are wrong, even if the dates are blurred, you pass through the man, and for one brief moment he shivers. And then smiles. No idea why, but you do, because you are still here, because they are still asking, and because the war may be over, but its lessons are in single quotes. This is the end. Not because the world has gone quiet, but because you have. It's the year 2137. And Earth spins beneath glittering satellites and whispering towers, casting shadows across continents now more interconnected than ever. Humanity has walked on other planets, built cities in the sky, rewritten what it means to remember. But here, in a museum beneath the rebuilt walls of Rouen, a woman stands before a display titled The 100 Years' War. One life, one journal, one century. Your journal. Or at least the fragments that remain. They've restored it, translated it, digitized it, preserved every faded line, every ink blot, every scribbled margin note about the taste of war bread or the weight of a bowstring in rain. Children gather in guided tours, listening to a soft-voiced narrator speak not of kings or treaties but of you. They do not know your name, but they know how you felt, how you walked beside dying soldiers, how you buried strangers and carried letters and waited for a peace that never came, how you noticed the little things, the crack in a prince's voice, the way smoke curled differently when the wind changed before an ambush, the things no one teaches, the things only memory can hold. They call you the witness of the war, not saint. Not soldier. Witness, and somehow, that is the most sacred of all. A girl, no older than 13, pauses before the journal's case. She leans close and reads one line aloud. I was here. She mouths the words like a spell. Then she looks up and, quietly, says, I believe you. You are more than satisfied. You are released. Not into heaven or oblivion, but into history itself, where your breath, your pain, your truth has been planted like a seed, and now it grows in hearts, in language, in silence. You are no longer holding the war. You are the reason it ended, and so, finally, You exhale the last of it. The banners, the bells, the burning. You let it go. The story has ended. The war has ended. You may rest now. You've journeyed through centuries of blood, silence, and renewal, not as a king or conqueror, but as something far more rare. A witness who survived to whisper truth. And now, the world sleeps easier because you remembered. Good night.